Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin. It is January 14th, 2025, and today we are here to talk about American Primeval. It is, last I checked, the number one show or movie on Netflix. It's a doozy. It's purportedly about the American West, especially in Utah, during the 1857-ish time frame. And it's got Mormons, it's got Brigham Young, it's got the Shoshone, Native Americans, it's got Mormon history. And so many people are watching this show, but they're also asking how much of this show, American Primeval, is actual U.S. history versus a dramatization. And so we love to do sort of these Mormons Respond episodes because we like the world to know how Mormons kind of react to discussions of them in the public arena. And having her back for multiple times now on Mormon Stories podcast, we're so thrilled. This was Barbara Jones Brown's idea. She reached out to me and said, "Hey, John, let's do an episode on this." And I'm so thrilled to have you back, Barbara. Thanks for joining us.
And I said, you've got to bring on Darren Parry as
well. Yeah. We'll introduce Darren in a sec. But Barbara, really quick, can you just reintroduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. I came on your channel, John, for episode 1838, coincidentally, to talk about our work on our recently published Vengeance is Mine, the Mountain Meadows Massacre and its Aftermath. That was a great pleasure to be able to share that history with you at that time. And we're back again because I was getting so many questions and media interview requests and so forth to say, okay, hey, what about this series is actual history and what is dramatization? So I'm happy to be here to answer those questions today with my friend Darren.
Yeah, and I'll just show a photo that we have in our slide deck. We've got a photo of your book, Vengeance is Mine. Please buy this book right now. I'd say it's, definitely top 1, 2, or 3 books on the Mountain Meadows Massacre. We have to give space for Juanita Brooks, of course, right?
Of course, yes, absolutely.
But this has got to be 2 or 3, right? If you're going to read about the book, I'd say 2.
It's by far the most comprehensive coverage of not only the Mountain Meadows Massacre, but its aftermath, the Utah War, the whole context that's covered in American Primeval is in this book. If people want to, read about what's factual.
And if that weren't enough, you're now an award-winning historian. I've got a photo here. What's this photo on the right?
So this was just last night, actually. My co-author, Richard Turley, and I were so honored to receive from the state of Utah, the Utah Historical Society, the best book. Well, actually, the Juanita Brooks Best Book in Utah History Award, which just coincidentally happens to be named after Juanita Brooks, who is my shero. She was the first historian, a Mormon woman who published in 1950 the Mountain Meadows Massacre, in which she courageously revealed and researched and told a story about her community's grim secret, the massacre. So she's been my inspiration as I've been working on this book as well. So just the fact that this award happened to be named after her was particularly special. And that photo there is last night with me, my husband, and our youngest daughter. And just to give you some perspective on how long I've been working on this Mountain Meadows project, I was pregnant with her when I started on it.
Oh, wow. And she's how old now?
She's now 18.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. Well, Barbara, so glad to have you back. And thanks for making this happen.
Thanks.
And who's your friend? Darren, welcome to Mormon Stories. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So my name's Darren Parry. I live in Cache Valley, where our Shoshone people lived for thousands of years. I'm the former chairman of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. I guess I'm an educator, and I've worked hard to tell the story of our people from our perspective. A lot has been written about the Shoshone people and Native American history throughout time, but it's time we hear from the people themselves. And so
yeah, and if you had asked, and I lived in, this is like the most embarrassing thing I'll admit today, probably on live internet. I lived in Cache Valley 12 years. And if you had asked me what Native American tribe populated Cache Valley. When my own ancestors lived in Franklin, Idaho, I would not have been able to say Shoshone. I know. Barbara, don't shame me.
I'm not shaming you.
But that's
I still
that's
meet
who was
people
there, right?
every day in Cache Valley that know nothing about the Bear River Massacre,
Yeah.
or nothing about the history of the valley.
Yeah. But my ancestors, on my mom's side, settled Franklin, which is near Preston, which is where Napoleon Dynamite, we all know that. But what we don't know is that they were interacting with Shoshone in the mid to late 1800s in Cache Valley.
That was the closest town to the massacre site. And the Shoshones and actually a lot of the people in Franklin got along. So,
yeah. So here's the book. Darren has a book. Darren Parry has a book. It's called The Bear River Massacre, Shoshone History. Darren and I were able to visit for half an hour right before. Delightful, knowledgeable guy. And you also have artifacts that we'll have you back on to show.
yeah, we could do a history day.
Okay. Well, we're really glad to have you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us, Darren.
Thanks.
There are a couple photos that Barbara and Darren shared. And do you want to talk about those first, Barbara? I want to make sure we get them in the right place.
Sure. Maybe we both talk about,
Okay.
the photos of our ancestors.
Okay, so Barbara, here's the first one I've got. Tell us who's in these photos.
So the person on the left, his name was William Schrader Holly. He was my great, great, great grandfather. And years after I started working on this project, because I became familiar with the names of the perpetrators of that atrocity, I was looking at my own genealogy one day and recognized a name and discovered that I was a direct descendant of William Holly, who was one of the perpetrators of the atrocity.
Of the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And the gentleman to his right is John Pierce Holly. That was my great, great, great uncle. And he did not participate in the crime. He spoke against it, but he traveled with the wagon train, the Fancher Baker combined wagon train of several companies, and wrote about his thoughts on the whole thing. So we can talk about him today as well.
So you're not just a knowledgeable historian, expert, you are a descendant.
I found out I was a descendant. Yeah. And just to touch on that, at first I thought that was just this crazy coincidence that I happened to be a descendant of a perpetrator. But then I started thinking about it and doing the math. John Dehlin, who was another perpetrator of the crime, when we started this project in 2005, he was known to have over 100,000 descendants. And that was in 2005. And he was just one of 50 to 60 white men who perpetrated the crime. So if you add up 50 to 60 and, add up all of those descendants, there are well over 1 million people out there who are descendants of perpetrators of this atrocity. Most of us just don't know it. So I'm sure everybody's going to start looking into their genealogy now.
Well, there's only like 4 million, by my count, 4 million active Mormons in the world. And 2 million of those would live in the U.S. So 1 million out of 2 million, that's a lot of us, I think.
Sure. And of course, if there's over 1 million people who are descendants of these perpetrators, large numbers of folks aren't even LDS and probably have no idea of this history. So
fascinating. Who are these ladies?
Oh, that's not my ancestors. The woman in the middle is Juanita Brooks. So she was, again, the courageous woman who bust open this story, if you will, publishing the book in 1950.
And then who are the women surrounding
Those are
her?
her sisters.
Oh, okay, fun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then tell us what this photo is.
Well, do we want to talk about Darren's ancestors?
Oh, no, he's next.
Yes.
I just assumed this was part of
that man was a Paiute. So let's talk about Darren's.
Okay, we'll come back to it.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. You
It's
sent me
okay. It
those
happens
photos.
all the time. Us white people, we always mix up.
No,
Darren's shaking his head.
I asked Darren which photos were his and which were yours.
Oh, sorry.
Those were yours, and so I just put them in your section.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. All right. So here's a picture of Darren. Darren actually is teaching at Utah State University. Go Aggies. I just had to mention that. But I grabbed this. Darren, where's this photo from? What website is this? Do you know? Gives a bio of you, the Utah Historical.
That was out at the massacre site.
Oh, okay.
I spent a lot of time out there.
Well, this is a photo of you, and it gives a little bit of a bio of you. But tell us about your ancestors.
Well, the reason I'm here is because of the woman on the far right. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here.
How do you pronounce that name?
Her name was May Timbimbu Parry.
Okay.
She was my grandmother.
Okay.
Thank goodness my parents both worked, and they dropped me off at her home. She taught me the language. She taught me to bead. She taught me to brain tan hides.
Wait, you speak Shoshone? Or
not anymore.
Okay.
As a young boy, I spoke it all the time.
Okay.
But not as much today.
Okay.
So she was our tribal historian. She was the reason that the Bear River Massacre is even known by anybody at all. She'd met historians, Brigham Madsen and others, to tell the story. And they actually told the story. And oftentimes they would give her the credit. But she always wanted to write a book, and she ran out of time. She got Parkinson's later in life and ended up passing at 88. But she was the reason we're here today. She wrote the story of the Bear River Massacre. And I'm honoring her legacy by carrying on her work to highlight the things that have happened and just be a truth teller. You know, not bring up anything that didn't happen, but let's talk about the truth. And that's the only way we're going to ever reconcile. And so because of her, I wrote the book to finish a project that she would have done. The person on the far left in those.
Can I jump in and say something about May, though? One more
Sure.
thing.
Have you met May?
No, but I learned about the Bear River Massacre of the Shoshone people because of May's work. I refer to her as the Juanita Brooks of the Bear River Massacre. She courageously gathered these oral histories and shared them. So as Darren said, we know what we know about it because of Darren's grandmother, May.
Because of her, the site used to be called the Battle of Bear River. She'd been to Washington, D.C. more than 10 times and testified at Congress. She met presidents. And because of her work, they changed the name to the Bear River Massacre. So you could Google search her and read for a month on the things that she's accomplished. So,
And remind me again, I was fiddling with slides. She's related to you.
my grandmother.
Your grandmother.
I'm her oldest grandson.
Okay, got it.
So, and
Okay.
the person in those photos on the far left is a recent picture that was found at the Church History Library. It's Chief Washakie. That's not the picture most people usually see. He usually is with a wife that's standing by his side and he's seated. That was a much younger Washakie. I mean, Sagwitch. I'm his third great grandson.
Sagwitch is on the far left.
Far left.
So you're a blood descendant
so I'm
of
a
Sagwitch.
direct descendant of Chief Sagwitch.
And he would have been a chief in Cache Valley when Brigham Young.
That's correct. He would have been one of the sub chiefs under Chief Washakie.
Yeah.
And that middle photo is of Chief Washakie. He mostly lived in the Green River, Wyoming range, and they ended up out on the Wind River range out by Lander, Wyoming, years later when they signed the Treaty of 1863 at Fort Bridger, by the way. And but he was a friend of Brigham Young. He married Jim Bridger ended up marrying Chief Washakie's daughter at the insistence of Chief Washakie. So, a lot of history there.
Okay. So Washakie would have been like the top chief of the Shoshone in the 1850s time period. Is that right?
It would have been for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's great to have. Okay. All right. Barbara, did you want to talk about this picture now or later?
No, when we just start talking about the history,
You'll have to remind me to come back because
sure.
it's out of order. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
All right. So the main event, we're here to talk about the Netflix series American Primeval. And before we do, let's give a couple disclaimers. One is that we're going to have a lot of spoilers. So if you don't want any spoilers, go watch the show and then come back. But we're also going to kind of do some recaps as we talk about this, because otherwise it's going to be really complicated. But that's the show. Barbara, also, it's really important that we maybe state that the creators of American Primeval did not intend this to be historically accurate. Right? Do you want to talk about that? Because that is a really weird and frustrating thing sometimes. And I was enraged once I compared actual history to what it transpires in this show. enraged. Anyway, what do you want to say about that?
Well, I wasn't enraged.
I was. Margie was too. It wasn't just me. It was Margie. It takes a lot to get Margie mad.
Well, I should just say that, yes, it is highly fictionalized. And again, that's why we're here to like answer questions about what actually happened and what was just, a dramatization, which is what the producers say it was. I think anything that raises awareness about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, about the Utah War, about the Bear River Massacre, about massacres of multiple groups of American Indians is a good thing. And so what I think is fantastic is that this dramatization is increasing people's interest in this period of history. And a lot of people are going online and grabbing our books and they're reading them. So that's fantastic. And so what I hope is, I know a lot of people have loved the entertaining value of it, which is fantastic. If they've enjoyed it, good for you. I respect that opinion. But if you want to like then learn more about the actual history about what happened this period, I hope that you'll go and read up. I brought a basket full of excellent books on this time period. I'd be happy to share as we talk as well. So I think it's a good thing.
Okay. Yeah.
But my concern is that people don't watch it and think that what they see is real. So, for example, American Indians weren't going around kidnapping, raping, and murdering innocent white women, like those kinds of tropes. The U.S. Army weren't always the good guys, the genteel people from the East coming out to tame and civilize the wild West. In fact, it was U.S. troops who wiped out, and Darren will talk about this more, I know, but wiped out his people, more than 400 Shoshone people in 1863. So I just hope people will take everything with a grain of salt, realize it's entertaining. It's not actual history.
And Darren, I'm going to get you in, but I'll just defend myself. I'll just say, I think it's worth seeing American Primeval. It's very well acted. I think it's great set and costuming, and it's a gripping story. I'll share the frustrations I had, but please don't misunderstand me. I do think it's worth seeing if you can stomach the violence, or if you're good at fast forwarding over really graphic violence, because it's Game of Thrones level violence.
Yeah. And I will add, and I know Darren will agree with this, that the actual violence, the actual history was far worse than what's depicted. So there's a lot of fictional depictions of violence. In the series, the actual violence was far worse.
And that's hard to imagine because it has shooting in the face, it has arrows through the head, it has scalping, Yeah, the
Mountain. Well,
yeah. Darren?
I want Darren to jump in too, but both massacres, most of the victims were children.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, Darren.
I mean, the big takeaway for me, I enjoyed it. It was violent. For me, as growing up in the church, knowing that it wasn't historically accurate at all. But here's the takeaway for me. It was something my wife said when we got done watching it. She's a convert to the church of 10 years. She grew up a Southern Baptist in the South, and she was active Southern Baptist her whole life. When she joined the church, her family did not. And so all of them still live in the South. We visit all the time. And she looked at me and she said, well, for all of my relatives that thought I was crazy when I joined the Mormon church, there's no question in their minds now after looking at, if they watched that. And she actually called all her family and said, you've got to watch this this Netflix series that's coming out, because it's going to talk about these relationships between the Mormons and the Indians and everybody else. And she was kind of hyping it like, you're going to hear the story. And at the end, she goes, my goodness, I don't know what my family will think about me now. And so it's how certain people were portrayed, how the church was portrayed. If you're not LDS all over the country, what do you think then? And her takeaway was, wow, that's not what I thought I was signing up for. And so, but I'm a person that has grown up learning history from the history books that has never been accurate anyway. And so, none of that was lost on me, that we've never really had a complete picture of everyone's perspective, and you just get one perspective. But how damaging can that be, especially for those who don't know better and have not been raised around the stuff that Barbara and I have been raised around? We know what's fictional, what's not. People around the country might not know so much.
Yeah. And that's part of what made me angry, is the ways that people looking in at Mormons might make assumptions about what was true that really wasn't true. Really quickly, I want to welcome everyone who's joining us in the live stream. We do a live stream partly because we love live interactive questions. And so I'll just share a couple as they come in. Punk writes, "This may be the first time I've been interested in my genealogy since I left Mormonism." Barbara, you like that? You're nodding. You like that?
Yeah, as I mentioned when I said there's probably more than 1 million of us who descend from perpetrators of the massacre, I think people are going to start thinking, "Oh my gosh, is it me?" So I'm going to. John's guest, Mindy, often brings in her binder of sources, which I love. I brought in a basket full of sources, but this book here, Massacre at Mountain Meadows, which came out in 2008, in the back of it, it has an appendix of all of the men who participated in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So if you want to look in the back of that book, you can check out and see if you happen to recognize an ancestor there. And why does this matter? It matters because if we don't understand what our ancestors did, and whether it was participating in the Mountain Meadows Massacre, whether it was displacing Darren's people and other American Indians across the country, whether our ancestors were slaveholders, or I should say enslavers, if we don't know that history, how can we feel sorry about it? How can we own that history and be able to reach out and say we're sorry and reach out in a spirit of healing and reconciliation so we can have peace? And I think we also need to acknowledge that we are meeting today here, John, from traditional homelands of Darren's people, the Shoshone and the Ute people. But if you don't know the history, we can't move forward if we don't understand what happened.
Yeah. Tell me if this comment rings true. Kevin writes, "There are no accounts of Native Americans raping any women, much less white women. That isn't a cultural norm in Native American societies." Kevin writes, "That is a European thing." Is that factual, not factual?
I don't know, but I would say that rings true with the values and things in oral history and stories that have been passed down. Stories were always told during the winter. It was the elders' time that tells stories, but the stories were meant to teach values on how to be a good person. And so I find that hard to believe, but that could happen. But heavens, I mean, you never know. Could there be a renegade native out there somewhere that took it upon himself to perpetrated some things against humanity? You know, I could buy into that, but it wouldn't have been widespread, or it wouldn't have been something that they normally would have done.
So I'll just pepper some fact checking in here. So there's this scene in the movie, again, this is a spoiler, where after the Mountain Meadows Massacre, several, I think, of the Mormon women were given to the Paiutes.
Yeah. So can I comment on this? So this was one of a very troubling aspect of the depiction for me. So in the actual Mountain Meadows Massacre, the Mormon militiamen roped in, if you will, a relatively small number of Paiute men to participate in it with them. And the reason why they did that was so they could blame the whole thing on the Paiute people, which is what they did. And the Paiute people unfairly and unjustly have borne that brunt for generations. And that's one thing we need to debunk for people, is the primary people who carried this out were white Mormon militiamen. But so what was troubling to me, though, was when the series showed the Shoshone people, who incidentally lived hundreds of miles north of the Paiute people, they come across a few Paiute men who have these kidnapped white women with them, one of whom is a Mormon. anyways, and the Shoshone people say, well, why did you do this? Why did you participate with this? And they said, because we were promised cattle and women. That was not true. They were promised cattle, and they did receive cattle. They never kidnapped white women. In fact, the only survivors of the massacre were children aged 6 and under. So again, that trope, that stereotype that's saying that Native Americans are going around kidnapping, raping, and then slitting the throats of white women was really troubling for me.
Yeah. So go ahead, Darren.
No, Hollywood's done a really good job over the last 100 years of saying who Native Americans are, the savages, the savage white man. And so it's easy to buy into that stereotype if you're not knowledgeable about it. But that wasn't the case.
Yeah, because in the movie, there's like, I don't know, 4 or 5 women who are all kind of like hand tied to this wagon. And then all of a sudden, I guess, was it Red Feather that comes in with some other Shoshone? They massacre all the Paiutes, and then they slit the throats of 3 or 4 of the women, and then save the one woman, the Abish Pratt. And I'm just like, if that didn't happen, or nothing like that happened and that was depicted, that was one of the things that was outrageous to me.
Nothing like that happened.
Yeah. See, that's such a dramatic. Why would they invent that if there was zero basis for something like that ever happening in the West?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, movies for the last 50 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Has depicted that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
but you can't, come on, Barbara. You see why I'm outraged, right? I'm not asking you to be outraged.
No, I'm upset about. Again, it's these depictions that promote or perpetuate these old stereotypes that have been debunked for years now, that we need to stop buying into these. So not only did they have the Paiute, murdering people at the Mountain Meadows Massacre so they could have white women, but then they have the Shoshone come in, kill the Paiute, and then they slaughter the white women. It's like you have 2 Indian groups that are brought in that participate in this horrific crime that wasn't real.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go. They're both laughing. Why are you laughing, Darren? Why are you laughing?
I just love to be with Barbara. She says a lot that I don't even have to say. So,
well, I want you to say it. Like I don't want to. Yeah, I want you to have the platform here, Darren.
It reminds me. There was a movie I saw of Bamboo. It's called Bamboozled. Spike Lee. It's one of his movies. He's a Black American director, and the movie's all about the portrayal of African Americans in Hollywood. I imagine there could just as easily be a movie about the portrayal of Native Americans in Hollywood, whether it's Tonto or that sort of thing, right? Yeah. It's a thing, right? It
is a thing. The Utah Film Commission did at the top floor of the rotunda of the Capitol, they had a history of film in Utah, but it shows films that were made here in Utah 50 years ago. And the directors had come in and say, we're not going to use any of the natives as actors. Heavens forbid. We're going to do white actors and paint them if we need to. But can you ask the medicine man of that tribe if he can bless the earth so it won't rain while we're shooting? I mean, so they honored the people in one respect, but they certainly wouldn't want them in their movie in another respect.
Yeah.
And that documents that.
Yeah. I will say I was impressed. I read a lot about this series before it aired, and I was impressed at their efforts to involve actual Native actors who, the Shoshone, Ute, and Paiute, who played the parts of their peoples. That was really cool, and I loved how they had them speaking the actual language. That was fantastic. They brought in all kinds of cultural experts, Native American cultural experts, to get the costuming right and the cultural aspects right. So I would commend the series for that.
Yeah, as I watched it, I know the man that they used out on the Eastern Shoshone Reservation as a consultant, and I thought the language was spot on. The culture as it was depicted was spot on.
Nice.
Just geographically a wrong place.
Okay, we'll get to that. Really quickly, there's a comments coming in. I got to fact check it with you guys. Jeannie writes, please make the point that scalping was introduced by white men. Is that true? Barbara? Barbara's saying no.
I've never heard that. I do know, I have read historical accounts of Native Americans scalping people. There was no evidence found of any scalping done at the Mountain Meadows
Okay.
Massacre.
I actually have heard that, though. I don't think, just from the oral histories that we have, and look, we weren't writing things down 300 years ago, 200 years ago. It was oral history and storytelling, but I didn't have any recollection that that is anything that we ever did. But I have heard before that scalping was done by introduced
Okay.
by colonizers.
Okay.
So there is one account during this time period, during the Utah War, the Shoshone Bannock, or today what's called the Eastern Shoshone, they did attack a Mormon fort called Fort Limhi in what is today Idaho, and they killed a couple of white Mormons there, and one of those men was scalped, and the Shoshone man held up his scalp and said, in Shoshone, he said, "One Mormon is brave," because he went out and tried to get involved. And so that is one account I read of. But again, I'm not an expert on scalping.
That's fine.
Darren
Yeah.
would know more.
I
than
don't
me.
know.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. All right. So let's go ahead and try and set the stage before we go into the plot of the movie. And Barbara, one of the first things you provided was a map of kind of the Western United States.
Yeah.
And I'll just tell you what really struck me, because I had no idea where Fort Bridger was relative to the Mountain Meadows Massacre site, relative to Salt Lake City. You're laughing already.
It's hundreds of
Yeah,
miles away
yeah.
from where these events.
So if you're looking at the map, there's like Salt Lake City, you can see it there kind of in the middle left. And then Fort Bridger is northeast of Salt Lake City.
in what is today Wyoming.
Right. And then the Mountain Meadows Massacre site is like way south in the
near
southern
Las
tip of
Vegas.
Utah.
For people who don't really know the West as well, it's a couple hours.
And the
from
movie
Las
makes it sound
Vegas.
like they're just going from like Salt
Yeah.
Lake to like Fort
That's
Bridger
what- it
to
was so
Mountain Meadows.
confusing for
Do you want to
both
talk
Darren
about
and I.
that? Like in terms of the movie and then
Yeah,
the
when I was watching
geographical-
it, they're depicting all of these events, and I'm thinking, that's like 10 minutes outside of Fort Bridger. There's Paiutes, and there would have never been any Paiutes up there.
Up
And,
where?
By Fort Bridger.
Right.
And so, and then the Mountain Meadows Massacre depiction, hundreds and hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
Okay, so there weren't
But-
Paiutes anywhere near Fort Bridger.
No.
No,
The
they're
Paiutes
never-
were where?
they're
Primarily.
Southwest Utah.
Okay. Okay.
Cedar City area.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you pull up, I sent another photo of just the Utah territory
that's next.
map.
That's next.
That shows.
Okay.
So not only does this show, white settlements in Utah territory during this era, but it also shows in general where the Paiute, where the American Indians' lands were. So you can see where Darren's people were.
So for those who are just
looking at-
listening only, can you describe the main things in that map that people would care about?
Okay. And also I should say these maps are in Vengeance's mind. That's where I took them from our book. So anyone, if you have the book, you can look at the end papers, the front of the book or the end of the book, and see these maps.
Okay.
But Darren's people, the Northwestern Shoshone, up in what is today Cache Valley, you can see they're up closer to Fort Bridger. The Utes are in northeastern Utah. The Pavant are kind of central Utah. And the Southern Paiute are southwestern Utah. And then the Navajo are southeastern Utah. But you can see, the map shows Fort Bridger. You can see that. And it's hundreds of miles from Salt Lake City and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles from where the Mountain Meadows Massacre occurred.
So having Paiutes massacring Shoshone is just ridiculous.
Shoshone killing the Paiute.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
they would have never
Okay.
interacted.
No,
Yeah.
they would have never
Okay, got it.
seen each other.
Okay.
The Shoshone and Ute interacted.
Okay, so we've mentioned Fort Bridger now. I think, can we all agree that Jim Bridger was the funnest character in this series?
Oh yeah, by far. In
Yeah.
fact, I sent Barbara a text and said, I hope Jim Bridger's character was like that. But I doubt he was.
That
I
cool?
think he
Yeah,
was.
He was
I-
fun. He was
I
fun.
think he was he was both of our favorite characters
Yeah.
by far. I think he was the writer's favorite character as well. It just kind of comes out. In fact, so Fort Bridger, Jim Bridger had sold that fort to the Mormons in 1855. So years before these events took place. So Jim Bridger was out of the picture by the time any of these events took place.
Can I back
but
up
I
for
think
just
they
one second?
liked him so much, the character so much, that they changed everything and changed all the chronology so that they could keep Jim Bridger in this story.
Okay, so let me read it. So Shea Wiggum plays Jim Bridger, and the little description says, based on the historical figure of the same name, American Primeval's Jim Bridger is in charge of the fort that bears his name. Bridger is a trapper, trader, guide, and general mountain man, pioneer, stuck in the constant conflicts between Mormons, indigenous Americans, and federal authorities. In addition to playing Elias Eli Thompson on Boardwalk Empire, Shea Wiggum has appeared in Vice Principals, Agent Carter, and Fargo. Okay, so Bridger is like an explorer trapper guy that sets up a fort in real American history, right?
Yes, exactly. So Fort Bridger was real. It was really a trading post, if you will. It was on the trail. If you go back to the Western American history map, not the Utah Territory one, the larger. So if you look, those are all the trails that headed from the eastern United States to the territories and the states of the West in 1857. And so if you look at those dotted lines, you'll see Fort Bridger sat right on those trails. So it was a place where immigrants crossing the country would resupply. They would stop, and if you can imagine crossing the country in a wagon, you can't carry all the supplies you need. So these supply stations, these supply forts, these trading posts were very important to immigration.
Okay.
So Jim Bridger, he's smart, he's enterprising. He sets up a fort right on the trail there. And what it really actually looked like was two long cabins, really long cabins, and then enclosed by fences on either side so people could put their animals inside. So
okay. So in the show, it's sort of like
huge. It's like a city in 1857.
Yeah. But also like, and we'll introduce these characters, but just conceptually, there's a mom and her son that are traveling west, and they end up, joining up with some Mormon, with the Fancher party.
And can I clarify that too? So it's one of the things we debunked is that it's not just the Fancher party or the Baker Fancher party, which it's been called for years. It was a group of several groups of immigrants coming from Arkansas. There was a leader in the train named Alexander Fancher and another named John Twitty Baker, but there were several trains that were traveling together by the time they got to Mountain Meadows.
So it wasn't just those who know about the Mountain Meadows
Massacre. Arkansas Company is the accurate way to refer to this group. And that's what historically the people at the time called it, the Arkansas Company.
Okay. So this mom and her son somehow connect with this Arkansas Company. I don't remember if they connected at Fort Bridger or somewhere else. Do you remember in the movie?
Well, yeah, it all started in Fort Bridger, and 10 minutes later they're massacred.
Okay, so to compare reality with the show, in the show, the mom and the son convince I'll just say Fancher party in the show to let her accompany them. And Jim Bridger, according to the show, would have been the head of Fort Bridger at the time that this mom and son connect with the Fancher party, so that then they go off and get massacred. You say that timeline just doesn't work out. And all of that would have been in 1857.
Yeah.
Right? And what's wrong with that timeline again?
Well, the fort is burned down by 57.
So it's gone. When the Mountain Meadows Massacre happens, the fort's already burned down?
Oh, yeah.
See, that's crazy. That's crazy.
So again, and I think I was so confused why the chronology went like that, why it was like, the show ends with Fort Bridger being burned down. That's the very end of the show.
That's 6 episodes in.
Happens in 1855 before these events even start. And I was like, why did they do that? And I think it's because Jim Bridger is such a great character. They wanted him for the entire show. And the writer, his name is Mark L. Smith. He was co-writer of the screenplay for The Revenant. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio,
I loved that movie. And Jim Bridger is a young teenager in that movie. And I read that the writer became enamored with Jim Bridger and his story. And so I think when he wrote, I'm just speculating here, but I'm guessing that when he wrote this story, he's like, oh, I love Jim Bridger. We got to keep him all throughout this whole story. And so that's why they have him there until the very last episodes. But in reality, the Mormons purchased Fort Bridger in 1855. And they purchased it so it could be used as a way station. So Mormon immigrants, all these people are coming from the East, from Europe. They're coming to the Salt Lake Valley to establish Zion and build up their kingdom of God. And so you have hundreds and hundreds of immigrants crossing the plains by wagon during this time. They need a place to resupply. So the Mormons buy Fort Bridger so their people can resupply there. And so that's why they purchased it. That was their motivation. And then when they learned that U.S. troops are coming to the territory to occupy their settlements, they burn everything in the troops before that's ahead of them to stop the troops from coming in. And Fort Bridger is one of the places they burn.
And
that's the motivations behind why they burn it down.
Do you remember what year Fort Bridger was burned?
57.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same year the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But before?
Oh, gosh.
I think so.
Can't remember if it was exactly before or not. I'm a little rusty.
Yeah.
But.
So, I mean, that's just completely the opposite of what the movie depicts in terms of a timeline.
Yes. And the motivations behind why the Mormons burned down are completely false in the.
Yeah, because in the movie, Brigham Young is just mad that he's being investigated about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and the U.S. Army is bugging him, and so he's like, "I know how I'll fix this. I'll just burn the whole Fort Bridger down." And it's episode 6 of a 6-part series.
Yeah, it is. They do burn it down, but it's to keep the army from approaching and getting close to occupying their cities.
Okay, so. Darren, any thoughts on that part of the on that part of the timeline?
What I can say about Jim Bridger, I love his character, but I think Native Americans love Jim Bridger. They love the mountain men that would often show up in their communities because they brought things that they needed, guns, metal knives. And so that trading was equitable between Shoshone groups and mountain men like Jim Bridger. The fact that Jim Bridger had 3 wives throughout his lifetime, only one at a time, and they were all 3 Native American women. A Flathead woman was his first, a Ute was the second, and then he ended on the good note with a Shoshone.
Are you biased? Are you biased?
Right.
As the third wife. So he finally got it right. But that speaks to his relationship with the Shoshone people. Chief Washakie gave his daughter to Fort Bridger and really
to Jim Bridger. Jim Bridger.
Jim Bridger to make that happen. So
here's a photo of Fort Bridger today, the Fort Bridger State Historic and Museum. It's in Wyoming. You can check that out when you're driving through Wyoming. Here's another photo of it for those who are joining us visually. Okay.
Can we say one more thing about Fort Bridger?
Yeah, please.
So the troops, when they're heading east, this is before the transcontinental telegraph is completed. And so the U.S. troops, as they're heading into Utah, they expect to get to Fort Bridger and have it resupplied. It's burned down, and they are so mad at the Mormons. They are furious, and they end up having to spend the winter out on the plains of what is today Wyoming, when they expected to make it into Salt Lake City before winter. The Mormon strategies of burning everything before them so that their animals, their draft animals, have no grass to eat and so forth. It works. It's very effective. And they end up wintering at the burned down Fort Bridger, and they build, just a camp city called Camp Scott, which is right there around what was Fort Bridger. And then the Army eventually rebuilds Fort Bridger.
Okay. All right, we'll introduce the next character. The character is Brigham Young, the second prophet of the LDS Church. Brigham Young's played by Kim Coates. One of the descriptions on the web says Brigham Young was the governor of Utah Territory from 1851 to 1858. After the migration of Mormon settlers from the Midwest during the mid-19th century, Young was a leader in the LDS Church, taking over the reins as president after the death of John Smith. That's wrong. Joseph Smith.
Oh.
Young was involved in establishing the university that now bears his name and in building the Salt Lake Temple. Kim Coates is known for shows like Sons of Anarchy, Bad Blood, and kconsidered playing Young and working with Peter Berg to be the offer of a lifetime. Okay, a lot of people. Oh, and Barbara, you brought a photo of the actual Brigham Young. Do you want to talk about that?
Brigham Young looked like. This photo was taken in 1855, which is the closest photo of the time period we could find. So that's actually what Brigham Young looked like during this time period.
So we're going between them.
They got the costuming right. I think they probably used that photo to get the costuming right. The photo of him with his long hair is actually from an 1847 image of Brigham Young, where he has this long hair to here. I believe it's
I
47.
think they were
Anyways.
going evangelical, frontier evangelical minister a little bit
Yeah,
too much.
well,
with
he's kind
Brigham
of
Young.
depicted as a Puritan preacher, which Brigham Young was not.
What do you mean
So
by that? Puritan?
just the way just everything, his demeanor, the way he acted, his preaching was very Puritan.
how would
Puritan religion.
how would Brigham Young, your understanding of Brigham Young, how was the depiction wrong? Other than what you just said, I guess.
Well, I'll talk about things they got right and the things that they got wrong. So when Brigham Young knows that the army is approaching Utah, he is terrified. I mean, and that's why he sends out the Mormon militia on the plains to try and stop them from progressing. They're really afraid that the troops are going to come in and occupy their cities. And this is based on their history. So they've been violently driven from Missouri and Illinois in just the prior 20 years before this by troops, by militiamen, by the Missouri militia, and by U.S. troops in Illinois and mobs. So they're afraid. They truly, one part when Abish, the Shoshone leader, is asking her, why do you people kill so much? And she said, fear. That was right on. That was one reason why this conflict took place. They were fearing what the troops' intentions were. And again, based on history. So Brigham Young, as the troops keep getting closer and closer, and eventually they do make it into the Salt Lake Valley, he hides. He goes into his compound, and in the buildings he lived in are still standing today in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. He goes into his compound, which has 10-foot walls all around it. He places guards at the door. He is hiding and trying to stay as far away from the army as possible. So the depiction of him sailing around, riding around all around the troops and everything was completely inaccurate. He was sending letters to the troops through his militiamen, but he was nowhere near those troops. He was afraid because he was also afraid he was going to meet with the same fate as his predecessor, Joseph Smith, who was lynched by a mob after federal authorities took him into custody. And then a mob came in and massacred Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram. So Young was worried about that. So that part of him being out in the plains when the army was there and everything was not at all accurate. His Brigham Young's preaching at the time was he could use very violent rhetoric in preaching against these approaching troops. He used very violent rhetoric saying, if the troops come here, lift up the sword and slay them. Or he said, if they come and try and run us out again of our new home, I say cut their damn throats. I mean, so he did have very violent rhetoric at the time, which I think led to the environment in which the Mountain Meadows Massacre occurred. There was a lot of war hysteria at the time. So, but there was one time I was really excited because I thought, okay, they're going to talk about the Reformation, the Mormon Reformation that was going on during the 1857 and 58 period. And Brigham Young he brings up the word Reformation. I'm like, oh, great, they're going to go into this history. Good. And then they never do. So that was disappointing.
Well, and for those who don't really understand Mormon culture, just describe in a minute what the Mormon Reformation was.
Yeah, so the Mormon Reformation took place in 1857 and 58, is the backdrop to this conflict. It just coincidentally happens to be going on at the same time. One of Young's counselors in the first presidency, his name was Jedediah M. Grant. He was kind of the man behind this Mormon Reformation. The leaders of Utah felt that the people of Utah, the Mormons of Utah, were not living up to their religion like they had been in the past, and that they weren't being faithful enough, they weren't being diligent enough. And so it was like a preaching effort in order to get Mormons to get married and take polygamous wives and pay their tithing and go to church every Sunday. And the preaching of it, though, could be quite violent to the point that it scared people. Wilford Woodruff, an apostle, he said it was like pitchforks raining down on the people's hearts to get them to change. So that's what the Mormon Reformation was. When Jedediah M. Grant passes away, it kind of dies down. And I think Young sees the effect that it's having on his people after he learns about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and they start toning down that violent language. Incidentally, the new person that Brigham Young calls as his new counselor in the first presidency to replace Jedediah M. Grant is Daniel H. Wells. Daniel H. Wells is the true head of the Nauvoo Legion. So this was another part I thought was funny, but Wild Bill Hickman, who was a true character in Utah and Mormon history, he was not the head of the Nauvoo Legion. It was Daniel H. Wells, who was a member of the first presidency of the church. So kind of like Henry B. Eyring today was Daniel H. Wells, who was actually the leader of the Nauvoo Legion.
What did you just think about, the best way I can describe how American Primeval portrayed Brigham Young is sort of like a frontier mob boss. Like he's literally going into Fort Bridger, trying to buy Fort Bridger, lowballing him, and then, basically threatening him, if you don't sell it to me, I'm going to burn it down. And, and also, we'll talk about this later, but almost like Brigham Young ordering assassinations and massacres almost directly. I mean, if I'm very sensitive to the label anti-Mormon, because that's just oftentimes how in our culture people just label people who've left the church or try and talk openly or even critically about the church. But if I've ever seen anything that started to bring up feelings of anti-Mormonism, honestly, I'm going to say I had those feelings while watching this show, because either I don't know Brigham Young, or they made him look like a freaking 19th century mob boss on the frontier, ordering massacres and assassinations and intimidating people and bribing them and or threatening to kill them. That's how I interpreted their depiction of Brigham Young in American Primeval. Tell me if you saw that depiction similarly, and if you feel like that's accurate or not.
Well, I will say that Brigham Young, without a question, was the most powerful man in Utah Territory, if not in this part, in the whole entire Great Basin of the West at that time. He was not only the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he was also the territorial governor. So he had a lot of power, and he wielded that power without question. Even with the purchase of Fort Bridger, the Mormons purchased it from Bridger's partner, Vasquez was his name, and Bridger later said, I didn't want to sell it. That was his assertion. My partner sold it, but I didn't really want to sell it. But yeah, without question, he was powerful, and he wielded that power. However, we did not find any evidence of him ordering the Mountain Meadows Massacre. We do have evidence of his war strategies leading to things that led to the massacre. But that was one thing that the series got right. The man that seems to be based on John Dehlin, I think his name was Woolsey, he tells, Young asks him if any white men were involved in the massacre, and Woolsey lies to Young and says, no, there weren't. That part was based on history. On September 29th, 1857, John Dehlin rides up to Salt Lake City, reports the massacre. He tells Young it was all Indians that did it. Young says, were any white men involved? And Lee says no.
Okay.
So that part was right.
Darren, let's get you in. How did you feel about the depiction of Brigham Young? Do you have any thoughts or feelings about that?
No, the only thoughts I had was I think he was a little more gentle than we give him credit for. Having said that, he ordered I don't want to say an execution of the Utes in 1850 out of Utah County.
Yes.
So there was a large population of the Timpanogos Utes that lived there, and the Saints were establishing communities further south. They needed to pass through that area, and so Utah County was a critical area, resource-wise too, because of the fish. The Utes didn't want to give it up, the Timpanogos people, and the leadership that was in Utah County at the time went to Brigham Young and said, we've got to get rid of them. We have got to get rid of them. It's the only way we're going to secure passage to the south. And Brigham Young kind of fought him on it a little bit, and in the primary sources I've read, and said, we don't want to kill him. And finally, they talked him into, and he signed this order that said, do everything you can to get them to leave. But if they don't leave, then that extermination order is in effect. You can kill them if they won't leave. And so Brigham Young signing that extermination order of any Utes that will not leave willingly in 1850 kind of gives you a playbook of what he's capable of anyway. But he kind of fought it at first and said, we don't want to kill them. We've got to befriend them and do everything we can to get along. But I think he was coerced into it by the other leadership that actually lived there. But still, at the end of the day, he was the prophet. He signed off on it. And that's what they did for the next few years.
Okay, wait. So Brigham Young did authorize a massacre in Utah County. What is now Utah County?
In 1850, he signed an extermination order that if the Utes would not leave and relocate, then it was okay to kill them.
And then referring to your book, the Bear River Massacre, I was talking to you about this before the show. I remember you told a story about, I won't name names because that's for you to do, but a church leader who said no Mormons were involved in this massacre, which raises the question, was Brigham Young involved in this massacre? What would your...
And my answer would be, I had a conversation with some leadership of the church, and the church historian at the time, and I won't say who it was, but kind of was upset at the story I was telling and said there was no Mormons ever fired a shot. We didn't participate in the massacre. And I said that might be true. I don't think the people that lived in Cache Valley did. They helped the army get there. They took care of them after, but I don't think they fired a shot, and I don't think they participated. But I said their presence in the Cache Valley, the depletion of the resources by the saints that moved there, was absolutely the cause of the massacre. So you keep the LDS people out of the Cache Valley, I don't think you have the Bear River Massacre. So were they the cause? I think so. Did they participate directly? No. But there's still some culpability there. And there's things that we need to reconcile.
Yeah. Darren's absolutely right. And again, we've been talking about like learning about our family history, and I started delving into my family history in another line. I discovered were the first settlers in Logan, what is today Logan. So I learned that my people displaced Darren's people. My people were a part of displacing them from their traditional homelands, and I've apologized to Darren
multiple times. She has apologized, which
again,
I appreciate, but not needed. But it's appreciated.
And yeah, so again, we all need to reckon with our history, and that's what I love about the popularity of this series, is it is causing people to think about this time period, and all of us have things we need to reckon with in our history. And I just wanted to add, Darren was talking about the slaughter of Utes by Native Americans in Utah County.
By who?
I'm sorry, by Mormons.
Okay.
Sorry, the slaughter of Utes by Mormon settlers in Utah County. I was reading about that and I was stunned. I read it after we'd published our book, but the leader of that, one of the leaders of that, his name was Elias Higbee, who was living in Utah County. His son, John M. Higbee, was a leader in the Mountain Meadows Massacre later. So he was 22 and living in Utah County when these slaughters of Utes took place. Later, he moves to southwestern Utah. He was the one who came up with the strategy, the sinister strategy of how they were going to, the Mormon militia was going to decoy the Arkansas immigrants out of their stronghold and massacre them. So I think I was stunned, and I think he probably learned how to do that from participating in killing of the Ute people.
Really quickly, I don't want to beat this to a dead horse, but with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, kind of the biggest question with the people I talk to is, did Brigham Young order it? Because what I think is implicit in that is, if Brigham Young, as a Mormon prophet, orders a massacre, then that's really significant. But it sounds like he did order a massacre, at least one, and that's the one we're talking about. I'm just curious why that's never, Barbara, if you have
the one that Darren described.
Yeah, and
that's never brought up by anybody.
It wasn't like one massacre. It was like a systematic hunting down and killing Ute people at Darren.
Yeah, and I'm going to give him a little bit of credit here. because the primary source I read said he was adamantly against what these people were advocating for, the people that lived in the Utah Valley. And he said over time, they just said, you tell us another way, because if they're not there, it's going to be a problem. And so he eventually relented, but he did sign that order, the extermination order, but it clearly said, you've got to get them to move. You move them, or, by whatever means necessary if they refuse to move.
And that's exactly what happened.
Okay. All right. Well, the next thing that's probably worth mentioning in the historical context is the Utah War. And that precedes the Mountain Meadows Massacre, at least according to Wikipedia, by at least a few months.
Well, the Mountain Meadows Massacre was a war atrocity as a result of the Utah War. So it was very much happening in that context. And so you have to understand the context of the Utah War to comprehend how the massacre could happen.
So tell us about the war, so that we can understand what the portrayers in American Primeval were trying to portray.
Sure. And if people want to dive deeper, and watching one of your episodes, we went into it deeply in episode 1838. But to try and do it as quickly as possible. So Brigham Young, as I mentioned, he's not only the president of the church, he is also the governor of the territory. And the Latter-day Saints are spreading, they are colonizing, they're taking possession of Native American lands and growing. And they are contemplating breaking off from the United States and forming their own country. They're contemplating, they do apply for statehood several times. What they're looking for is independence to rule themselves. They're also practicing polygamy. So you have this growing theocracy in the West, and you also have them practicing polygamy, when American values, white American values at the time, were democracy and monogamy.
What about slavery?
Oh gosh, that's a whole, you need to have Paul Reeve on.
Separate show.
Yeah, Paul Reeve has written
But the short answer is yes,
books
right?
on this.
Yeah.
What's that?
The short answer is yes, right?
Yeah, eventually they make slavery legal in the territory in the 1850s, so that converts to Mormonism from the South who want to bring in the people that they enslave, that they can. It's not a chattel slavery territory, but anyways, there's whole books written on that, and I'm not an expert on it. Our friend Paul Reeve is. My
grandmother would tell us stories about the first saints that moved to the Cache Valley in 1855-56. Peter Mon's group had black slaves with them. And the Shoshones were fascinated by these black people. They'd never seen people black before. And so it was curious to the Shoshone people why they would have them.
But I also thought that there were Native American slaves in Utah Territory.
I'm sure there were, and not to really make my Ute friends mad, but the Utes were known for stealing children and enslaving people.
Yeah, Paiute.
And selling the children to the Spanish and Mexicans.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so Utah War, what else should we know?
So a newly elected president, James Buchanan, he starts hearing from his cabinet members and from territorial appointees in Utah that come back to the east. They're saying, like, you got to do something about these Mormons in Utah. They're building a theocracy, and they're practicing polygamy, and they're forming relationships, and there were a lot of friendships and allyships with Native Americans as well. There's all kinds of relationships going on. And so Buchanan gets the advice to replace Brigham Young as territorial governor. U.S. territories could not elect their own leaders. They had appointed leaders from Washington, which of course infuriates not only the Mormons, but other settlers in other territories. So he decides to replace Brigham Young with a new governor named Alfred Cumming from Georgia. And not only that, to send a contingency of U.S. troops with this new governor, with these new territorial appointees, to assure that the Mormons will accept them. So, and then Buchanan doesn't tell Brigham Young why he's sending an army to Utah. He doesn't tell them that he's replacing them with a new governor. They don't have word of it. They just hear through the rumor mill, if you will. And so the Latter-day Saints react, oh, wow, this is not good. We've got troops coming to occupy our territories, our cities again, which is again, what they've experienced over the past 20 years. So Brigham Young says, okay, the new territorial appointees, they can come in, my replacement, they can come in, but the troops shall not enter our settlements. And so he sends Mormon militiamen out on the trail, as I mentioned before, to burn all the grass before the approaching army. Their draft animals all die, the army's draft animals, so they can't keep progressing. They're harassing the troops. But Brigham Young says, we do not want to shed a drop of blood if it can be avoided. He's trying to win public opinion. He's hoping that Congress, when it meets later that year, and the American people will turn on President Buchanan and his decision to send troops to occupy Utah territory. And he says, if we could just hold them and keep them out of our settlements before the winter, before the snow set in, when no one can travel, let alone a woman, 2 kids, and a man on horses. Anyways, so he does that. They get stalled on the plains. But what happens is Young also is encouraging local tribes to raid immigrant cattle companies that are passing through the territory at the same time. If you want to go back to the one map of Utah territory, and again, this is on our book, Vengeance is Mine, if people want to look at it. Young starts meeting with leaders of all of these different tribes and bands and saying, hey, we want you to raid the cattle of these cattle companies. And the tribes, a lot of them say, we don't want any part of that. That you've taught us not to steal. And they say, well, things are different now. The Americans are coming to kill us, and you've got to join with us and be allies.
So Mormon prophet Brigham Young met with Native American tribes to say, please steal from U.S. Army soldiers.
Well, there's 2 different things. So the first thing I was mentioning was he sends militia to what's now Wyoming, Fort Bridger area, to stop the troops from approaching. Then what he does within more where Utah settlements are, he's meeting with an interpreter named Dimmock Huntington, and they are telling tribes, please run off cattle companies, so that the federal government will say, oh my gosh, all hell is breaking loose now that we've sent the troops. And Young, this is his violent rhetoric. He's whipping people up. He's saying, you cannot pass through this territory anymore to get to California, to get to Oregon, if you send troops here, because all hell's going to break loose. And then Indians, who we have been playing on 19th century stereotypes, racialized stereotypes, we have been keeping these routes safe for immigration. And if you send troops here, I will say no more to the Indians. I will hold them back no more, but I will say unto them, do as you please. And so to ensure that these cattle raids take place, Mormon leaders lead these cattle raids. And so again, looking back at that Utah territory map, if you look to the left, it shows where all these cattle raids took place, and you can see them on the map. They're marked by stars. Between September 7th and October 3rd, 1857, there are several different cattle raids on various immigrant cattle companies that take place as part of this war strategy.
It's like 10 or 15, is that right? I mean,
no, it's more like 7 or 8, I think. But the same thing, Young is saying, do not, kill anyone. We don't want to shed a drop of blood, just run off the cattle. At only one of these cattle raids do things go awry, and that's at the Mountain Meadows where the massacre takes place.
So Mountain Meadows Massacre maybe started as a cattle raid?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
That was the original intention. When it starts, there's skirmish between the attackers and the immigrants. They get out their guns, they start fighting back. Some of the immigrants are killed in this initial attack. A 5-day siege sets in which the immigrants, they circle their wagons and they're holed up inside. And then the Mormons make the terrible decision. They find out that everyone inside the wagon corral knows that white Mormons are involved in this. This is not just Native Americans. And so they make the horrible decision that they've got to wipe out all the witnesses. So that part of the American Primeval was true. They were trying to wipe out all the witnesses. And they do. They kill everyone in the company except for 17 young children, aged 6 and under, most of whom were babies and toddlers. But no adults escaped the Mountain Meadows Massacre. also no Mormons were traveling with those who were massacred. That was a fabrication.
And so yeah, in American Primeval, Abish escapes, several other women escape. They're the ones that are, given
Supposedly given to the Paiute, that cattle were given to the Paiute.
And also the main character, the Jimmy Riggins Friday Night Lights character, he also was both a witness, according to the American Primeval, a witness to and a survivor of the massacre, and also the Jacob. Is it Jacob Pratt?
Yeah. There were no adult survivors.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to call out.
Yeah.
So those are major plots of American Primeval.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that was true was anyone that survived that final massacre after the 5-day siege, the Mormon militiamen went around, and anyone who was still alive, they shot them in the head. And they also looted the bodies. So there is an account of John M. Higbee pulling out a gold watch. So that part was accurate.
Okay. But to say that Jacob Pratt, Abish Pratt, Isaac Reed, Devin Rowell, Sarah Rowell, all characters in American Primeval, that they all both witnessed the Mountain Meadows Massacre and survived it, and then were hunted down to be killed. Not true.
They
Okay.
very effectively and sinisterly murdered everyone except these little children that they said they spared them because they were, quote, too young to tell tales.
So it's worse because no one survived, actually.
Yeah, the actual massacre was far more violent and horrific than what was depicted.
Okay. I'll tell you something that may be shocking to you, Barbara, and Darren, I want to get you in on the Mountain Meadows Massacre piece as well. But I was talking to some friends at a dinner party last weekend. They had seen part 1 of American Primeval, and then they said to me, "I can't wait until the Mountain Meadows Massacre is
Exactly.
depicted."
I know, because I was watching. I was like, "Is this the?" It was just so different. And the men riding in on wearing hoods was so. They look like the KKK, but with potato sacks on their heads. That was so confusing to me. So I thought this has got to be something else, because the men of the Mountain Meadows Massacre did not need to wear potato sacks because they knew they were wiping out all the witnesses.
So you too didn't recognize they were depicting the Mountain Meadows Massacre while you were experiencing
and then
it.
Later I was like, oh, I guess that was the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And also because it was 10 minutes outside of Fort Bridger, when in fact it was hundreds and hundreds of miles away in the desert in the summer, in the heat of, it was on September 11th, 1857. So it was hot where they were, the people.
Okay. So Darren, you're laughing. What did you want to?
No, just about the historical accuracy of the whole thing. I mean, where they took place, and there's a scene in there that they massacre some Native Americans, and some people have said that depicted the Bear River Massacre. Well, it really didn't.
It didn't at all.
It didn't at all,
Yeah.
and not for a thousand reasons, but one time a year. The scope of how many actually died at the Bear River Massacre versus a small village of 5 or 6 lodges. And so but the thing they got right is the violence that can be perpetrated in the name of manifest destiny and religion. And so that part rings true, but nothing else historically was accurate as far as place and time.
Yeah, I think my guess is they open with a massacre, which is loosely based on the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and they close with the massacre of the Shoshone. And in reality, the Bear River Massacre took place in 1863, Mountain Meadows 1857. I think they kind of used those massacres as the bookends of the series. Yeah. So probably maybe kind of inspired by Bear River, but nothing close to what it actually looked like, other than the horrific violence of it.
Okay, so as far as the Mountain Meadows Massacre go, no men in hoods.
No.
It was not in the winter. It was not anywhere near Fort Bridger. It was after Fort Bridger had already been burned down.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact date that if Fort Bridger was burned down, but it was burned down during the Utah War.
Okay.
So I think it might have been right before the massacre or right after. But.
No one survived no adults survived the Mountain Meadows Massacre, any other, I mean, the violence was, I mean, it was the arrows and the scalping and the shooting, indiscriminate shooting.
No evidence. So forensic anthropologist named Shannon Novak examined remains. We can go into that. It's another story, but she also found no evidence of scalping at the Mountain Meadows, and the historical record shows no evidence of scalping at the Mountain Meadows. I don't think the Paiute engaged in scalping.
Okay.
So
anything else about the Mountain Meadows Massacre you wanted to mention in terms of accuracy or historicity, or did we cover the main stuff?
I think we covered the main stuff.
Okay. Okay.
And again, if there's any questions that are popping up, happy to answer.
Okay. Here's one photo that I found of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Just for those who want to view it, it's a woman pleading to a man on a horse, and he's about to shoot the woman, for those who are listening. And then here's the Mountain Meadows Massacre site today. It's near kind of St. George, Cedar City.
Yeah, it's about 40 minute drive north of today's St. George, Utah. St. George didn't exist at the time.
Okay, so the next thing I wanted to just to kind of set the scene, and then we'll get into the characters themselves a little bit. We've talked about the Utah War and the U.S. Army troops that were sent. We've talked about Brigham Young. What we haven't talked about is what's depicted, I think, in American Primeval as the Nauvoo League.
Nauvoo Legion.
Nauvoo Legion. Oh, well, I think, did they call it Nauvoo League?
They did.
Okay.
I think they got it right. I think they called it Nauvoo Legion.
Okay. Well, in the description that I found, it did refer to as the Nauvoo League. So
okay.
That doesn't matter really.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, I think of a Nauvoo Legion as what Joseph Smith led in Illinois before he was murdered. So was there a Nauvoo Legion in 1857?
Yes,
and tell us about who was it and what were they doing and where were they? And
yeah, that's accurate.
Okay.
So Joseph Smith, as you mentioned, who was the first president of the LDS Church, he forms in Nauvoo, where he is the mayor. He creates a militia group, and they name them the Nauvoo Legion because that's where they live. They live in Nauvoo, Illinois. And so when the Latter-day Saints, they come and they start establishing their settlements in what is today Utah, they have their own militia, and it's called the Nauvoo Legion, harking back to many of the men had been in the Nauvoo Legion in Illinois. So anyways, harkening back to that. So back at this time, throughout the United States, there weren't formal police forces. That comes much later. And so many territories, cities had militia groups, and they were kind of in charge of, enforcing the law, and they didn't always enforce the law, of course. But so, for example, in Missouri, there was a Missouri militia that massacred a group of Mormons in 1838. Anyway, so there is the Nauvoo Legion, which is the militia in Utah, and it's when Young learns that the troops are on their way that they start riling up the militia, and they start drilling and preparing for a possible war, preparing for a possible conflict. And so basically, if you were a man age 18 or older, you were automatically in a militia. So every man was considered part of a militia group in Utah. And again, they become active in 1857 when they learn the troops are on their way.
Okay, so the troops that Brigham Young mustered to potentially oppose the U.S. Army troops in the Utah War were called the Nauvoo Legion.
Yes, that's accurate. That's very accurate.
Okay.
But they didn't have like formal uniforms like they have in American Primeval. They were just like a ragtag group of settlers just eking out a living in the Great Basin.
Here's a photo of the character James Woolsey, played by Joe Tippett. And I think this is supposed to be a Nauvoo Legion uniform.
Yeah, that I didn't recognize that. Yeah. Again, they were just a ragtag group of settlers just trying to survive at this point in Utah. Yeah.
Anything you want to say about the Nauvoo Legion, Darren?
No.
Okay. Well, that was one of the most upsetting things to me about this documentary, that again, for me made it almost border on a term that I hate, which is anti-Mormon, is the scene where like one of the soldiers of the U.S. Army,
The leader, yeah.
is like writing in his journal, and all of a sudden his finger gets shot off, and then he stumbles out of the tent, and the Nauvoo Legion is massacring all the soldiers in the U.S. Army. And I'm thinking, listen, fine, historical fiction, fine. Yes, anything that draws attention to history, good. But don't manufacture entire scenes that, number one, we know could have never happened.
Yeah.
Because they're completely outside the timeline and any normative behavior that we know happened. And Mormons never assassinated an entire legion of U.S. Army troops.
Well, and the truth is that if a small ragtag group of Mormon militia had attacked the U.S. Army, they would have been wiped out within 10 minutes. I mean, the number of army men, the munitions they had, they would have completely wiped them out if they'd done an open attack like that.
And so that's why I'm like, to me, that makes the Mormons and Brigham Young look horrific, like genocidal maniacs. And
then the next day they wipe out the Shoshone,
same
group of militiamen in the depiction.
Yeah.
But that's why my wife said, if they didn't think I was crazy when I joined, they certainly think I'm crazy now to be a part of this group.
Yeah. Based on fiction.
So based on fiction. And man, haven't we seen the rise of that over the last few years in our society? You know, a story perpetuated, and now all of a sudden it's true.
Right.
It's not true.
Right. Yeah, I'm totally open to fair criticism of the Mormon Church and an accurate telling of its history. But
so am I.
Yeah, of course you are. Both of you are. You're historians. But to depict Brigham Young and the Nauvoo Legion as like bloodthirsty, massacring people of U.S. troops and Indian tribes and settlers paints a picture of Mormons that's horrific, that is just unfair.
I mean, Mormons did wipe out the innocent people from Arkansas, and they did wipe out the Ute peoples, and there's something called the Circleville Massacre where they wiped out. So this was happening. Just the way that it's portrayed isn't accurate. But again, it's their struggle for survival and resources. Not that justifies it, but the fear and the struggle to just survive, I think.
And then I think you just need to make sure that, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, I don't know if Barbara could tell me today, did Brigham Young absolutely know or order that to happen? That makes a difference to me as you look at a global church, whether the church perpetuated this on something, or was it a bunch of locals that thought they'd heard this certain message from their leadership, took it upon themselves to do these acts of violence. So I think we need to be careful about where it comes from, because I don't know if Brigham Young's ordering that stuff from the pulpit or behind the scenes. That's a completely different thing for me.
Exactly. It's a different scale.
Yeah.
Like, stick to the massacres that were real.
Yeah.
Don't invent additional massacres and put Brigham Young as the man who's commanding these fictional massacres.
Yeah. And, as a historian of this period, when I started on this project, my number one question was, did Brigham Young order this? And I was like, if he did, I sure as heck want to know. And so again, we dug and dug and dug, and I, over time, became absolutely convinced he did not order the massacre. He had this strategy in place that led to the massacre. He had violent rhetoric at the time because of the Mormon Reformation, violent rhetoric against the troops that created an environment in which the massacre occurred, but found plenty of evidence, actually lots of solid evidence showing he didn't order it.
Okay. And
I would have, if he had ordered it, I would have said so.
Yeah.
I would have had no problem saying that.
Really quickly, I want to thank a couple people that threw in their support. Edward Johnson, thank you for that super chat, that donation that makes all of this possible. Also want to thank MTG Danny Boy. They ask, in your opinion, what's the worst thing Brigham Young ever did? We've talked a lot about that already. Do either of you want to answer, add to what we've already said about Brigham Young, or do you feel like we've said enough?
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is, again, he did not intend the massacre to happen, but and again, it was a time of war. It was a war strategy. But looking back in hindsight, he would probably look back and say that was probably the biggest, mistake I ever made, something that ultimately led to this horrific massacre. I think perpetuating polygamy, I don't agree with.
And I wish he would have looked at Native Americans in the same light that the
Yes.
founder of the church did.
Yes.
Joseph Smith.
How so?
I think Joseph Smith said who they were, these people were. They have a book of scripture, which they absolutely think, the Book of Mormon is their book. And it speaks of who Joseph Smith thought those people were, descendants of, Laman and Lemuel and those last peoples in that last great fight. And so I think he sent, the first mission was to the Lamanites. And so I wish he would have had more compassion from the pulpit for the Native American people, because there's a large presence of them in Utah. And I have little kids ask me all the time, couldn't you both just lived in the same place and got along? Absolutely. But the message wasn't that. And so, I'm sure Brigham Young had a lot on his plate.
Yeah.
Coming west, establishing this Zion out here, as they call it. But I wish it would have been more. I just wish he would have looked at Native Americans in a different light.
Yeah, makes sense. Also want to thank Conkey for their support. Conkey asks if they made a reference to Olive Oatman. I have no idea who Olive Oatman is. Do you know?
I don't.
Okay, so sorry we don't have an answer for that. Really quickly, Darren, let me just ask you to talk just quickly about your perceptions of the portrayal of a few characters. The first character that we meet, I think one of the first characters that we meet is a character named Two Moons, played by Shawnee Poirier. Two Moons is described as a stowaway who does not speak. Two Moons communicates using sign language. Her friendship with Devin, which is the son of Sarah, that's the mother-son combo that are trying to get west. Two Moons makes friends with Devin the son, and helps her find some joy after she flees the Shoshone village. And quickly, the actress who plays Two Moons, Shawnee Poirier, grew up in Oglala Lakota Reservation and has previously been in Stranger Things and Dark Winds. Really quickly, you kind of meet Shawnee or Two Moons when she steals a knife, and then very darkly, and just kind of a warning, she goes to sleep in her teepee, and then who I think the person that's portrayed as her dad sort of comes into the tent, pushes his wife aside, and then tries to, it appears to rape Two Moons. I apologize for the graphic language. And Two Moons stabs her dad and runs away. Like, how did you feel as a Shoshone? First of all, was Two Moons portrayed as a Shoshone? And then how did you feel about that?
I think she was, but even that scene itself, the father appeared to be drunk. I mean, when he came into it made him appear to be drunk. Is my first impression was.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's, we've seen that, the drunk Indian, right? So, but I think Two Moons.
That's a trope you're saying.
Yeah. I think Two Moons was one of the best things about American Primeval. And so it made me think of Sacagawea, think of these young Shoshone girls at a very young age, and the amount of knowledge or the amount of just awareness of their situations and how to navigate those things, and how she navigated all of that to stay alive and to be useful and to be loved at the end of it, a beloved character in the whole thing. that was one of the most beautiful parts of the thing for me. But it made me think of Sacagawea and getting sold off to a couple of white guys and going on an adventure. She was certainly on an adventure, and I thought she did a masterful job.
Yeah, Two Moons was probably my second favorite character after Jim Bridger. That was just, the most interesting to me. I thought I loved her character. I thought the actress did such a good job. I was sad that they didn't give her a voice. So they said she'd had her tongue cut out, which meant she couldn't talk the whole time. And I'm like, why are you've got this great female character. Why are you not letting her have a voice? Why did you cut her tongue out so she couldn't talk?
And according to your both best understandings, how common would it have been for Shoshone to cut out the tongues of their children?
Not very common. I've not heard of that practice.
Ever? Like,
no, I haven't. So
where did they come up with that?
I don't know.
I don't know. And who cut it out? Nobody says who did it. So, but in the context of everything else we saw, anybody could have done it.
It just goes back to, like, so often women don't have a voice in Hollywood's depictions, or women just aren't, so how many stories or even fairy tales do we have where the mother's dead? The mother doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But I like that she didn't have a voice.
You like that? I
like that you understood her character and you understood everything that she was trying to accomplish without her speaking a word. I think we talk too much. Hate to say that to you, John, but
and me.
I think not you, Barbara, for sure. But man, I think sometimes we talk too much and we need to listen more.
Love it. Let's talk about a couple other Shoshone characters. The next major character that we'll discuss today is Red Feather, played by Derek Hinkey. He's described as a member of the Shoshone Nation. He's a warrior who becomes enthralled with Abish Pratt, who's the Mormon wife, who survives, according to American Primeval, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and then is first, I guess, given to the Paiutes, but then stolen by the Shoshone from the Paiutes. Anyway, he's enthralled. Red Feather's enthralled with Abish. He will defend his people to the death and do whatever it takes to hold on to their land. And then Derek Hinkey, who plays Red Feather and is a member of the Paiute Shoshone Nation. Now that's putting them together. What's that about?
Well, there's a group of Paiute Shoshone people in Idaho, Idaho-Nevada border.
Okay.
So there is actually a tribe of under that name. So that's
I've never heard of that group. When did
the Shoshone Paiute? They're a recognized Idaho. They're one of the 5 tribes in Idaho.
Okay.
They're out by Mountain Home Air Force Base.
And was it because Paiute people moved north some and then intermarried?
And
with Shoshone, or?
And there's Paiute out in Nevada too.
Yeah, right.
So just different groups of Paiutes. The Paiutes that we've been talking about, though, were homeland to southern Utah, but there were other Paiute groups everywhere else.
So. Well, real quickly, if a character sort of represented a trope, you might say that Red Feather, or one might say that Red Feather represented sort of the angry, violent,
kidnapping white women and holding innocent white women against their will,
and sort of almost bloodthirsty. So how did you feel about the portrayal of Red Feather as a Shoshone?
I thought it was a little bit over the top, but I mean, Native Americans were like anybody else. Everybody had a personality, and I think they highlight that with speaking to the woman of the Shoshone tribe. She's talking about Red Feather as like he's a renegade. He's out doing his own thing. We don't sanction anything he does, and he's out causing trouble for all of us. And so did those characters exist throughout the history of Native American country? Absolutely they did. I'm sure they did. I'm sure there was ones who were angry that the settlers were encroaching on their territory. What I loved about him in sparing the woman, the only woman that was spared, is he loved her bravery. She stuck her neck out and said, "Go ahead, do it." And that's what saved her.
Oh, Sarah, when Sarah Pratt.
Abish.
When Abish. When Abish sticks her neck out.
Yeah.
He's about to cut her throat.
If she would have cowered, she would have been a casualty like everybody else. But she said, "You know what? Here it is. Do it." And I think he loved that, back at him. I don't think he'd ever been challenged like that before. And so, but do I think those kind of characters existed? Absolutely, I do. So,
and we already mentioned this, but just because we're talking about Red Feather, it's Red Feather in American Primeval that slits the throat of like 3 or 4 white women in a row who are just tied to a wagon. That's not what natives did.
Typically, no. But can I say
Never?
that never
Okay.
happened? No,
Okay.
I couldn't say that.
Okay.
But typically not.
Okay. I was grateful that Red Feather, according to American Primeval, the Red Feather character didn't rape or even try to have sex with the Abish character. I'm glad they didn't throw that on top.
I don't think it was ever any part of what they did. So,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay.
And I think Native American tribes were smarter than that. If they were going to kidnap white women and bring them in their tribe, they knew that white men would come hunting for them and there would be trouble. They weren't naive enough to think that they could do that and not have repercussions, violent repercussions that would come on their people.
The last character I wanted to mention that was Shoshone is the character of Winterbird, which I didn't even hear this name during the show, played by Irene Bedard. And the description is Winterbird is a prominent leader of the Shoshone tribe who helps Sarah, Devin, Isaac, and Two Moons to recover after a brutal encounter with rogue trappers. Winterbird is also Red Feather's mother. And did they depict Winterbird as sort of the adopted mother of Isaac Reed as well? Did you guys remember how Isaac Reed, the character played by Taylor Kitsch, Timmy Riggins, he according to American Primeval, he lived with Shoshone for a while?
That's how I took it.
Okay.
Yeah, I took it. There was a relationship there. But that portrayal of all those events made perfect sense to me, because we live in a matriarchal society within the Shoshone Nation, and our women are strong leaders and outspoken, and you listen to them, and they made many of the decisions that were made. So seeing that character with a strong personality like that was beautiful for me.
I love it. So that felt good.
Yeah,
that felt good to you.
It was exactly the way. That's when I said earlier that the culture, I think they got the culture right. They absolutely hit it out of the park with that, because that would be something that most tribes recognize.
Did you like Winterbird, Barbara?
Yeah, I loved having that strong female character. I thought that was great.
Reminded me of my grandmother. I mean, just a strong Native American woman that people listen to.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've already mentioned James Woolsey briefly. He's played by Joe Tippett. My favorite thing about Joe Tippett is that he's married to Sarah Bareilles, the singer. I'm a Sarah Bareilles fan. He's a key member of the Nauvoo League. He leads the attacks carried out under the guise of being indigenous Americans. He is devoted to the Mormon faith and to maintaining control of the Utah Territory as anti-Mormon sentiment rages around him. So is James Woolsey an actual character in history?
No.
Okay.
I think just kind of watching him, it seems like he was based on John Dehlin, who was one of the leading perpetrators of the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
Okay. And that was a question by Rye the Guy. Was Brother Woolsey of the Mormon Legion supposed to be a combination of John Dehlin and Isaac B. Haight? I found him to have characteristics of both men. Barbara, what is that?
Yeah, so Isaac Chauncey Haight was the state president and mayor of Cedar City, Utah. And he was the local leader that gave the final go ahead and massacre the survivors, the witnesses, if you will, at Mountain Meadows. So
what was Isaac's middle name again?
Chauncey. So Isaac C. Haight.
Oh, so he has Isaac B. Haight, but it's C. Haight.
Isaac
Okay,
C.
got
Haight.
it.
And so Isaac C. Haight was actually kind of a dandy. He was like a fancy dresser. I've seen different photos of him and read accounts of that he liked to dress up. And so whereas John Dehlin was more of a rough and rugged frontiersman, if you will. So I don't know. I didn't see Isaac Haight in Woolsey at all. I did see John Dehlin in Woolsey.
Well, thanks to Ry the Guy for that donation. And if everyone who's watching or listening could just take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, wherever you are, subscribing to these channels helps keep us alive. And we're always grateful to our monthly donors at the Open Stories Foundation at Mormon Stories that pay to make all this possible. So thank you for being a donor. We really appreciate it. Okay, let's talk about a couple other characters. There's the character Sarah Rowell, who's probably one of the main characters, 2 or 3 main characters. She's the mom that's going west along with her son Devin. So it's Sarah and Devin. Neither of them were Mormon, although they're trying to meet up with Sarah's husband or Devin's father. But anything either of you want to say about Sarah or Devin, or is it not really worth mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, they're entirely fictional.
Yeah.
I personally found the character incredibly annoying
Why?
because she had this experienced guide.
Yeah.
The one that's played by Taylor Kitsch, she was like, don't do that. She's like, trust him. She's a woman from Pennsylvania. She knows nothing about the West. And she entrusts this guide to help her cross the West. And she keeps going against everything he says. And she keeps getting herself into trouble. And I was like, come on. Anyways, I just found her character annoying personally.
So Darren, I'll ask you, but Barbara, so there's the scene where they come upon this little girl with the doll.
Yeah.
And she's speaking French. And the
guy is like, don't leave her alone, leave her alone.
Isaac's
and she
like,
keeps going against him.
Isaac's like, don't get off your horse, don't get off your horse. And Sarah hops off her horse and takes the little girl. Why is there a French little group of Frenchmen in the frontier?
I'm not sure. And I'd love to hear if Darren has insights, but a lot of the trappers were French.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wondered if that was like a trapper group.
Yeah, I mean, the French were around, so they were part of it. They were back east long time before that. So the fact that there were French people in it and a French person got hung at Fort Bridger in the opening thing, that made sense to me.
Okay.
And I had the same things Barbara just said about her. I thought, when is she going to just shut up?
Yes, shut up.
Quit getting these people in more trouble than they deserve to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, she was a little bit annoying at first.
All right. 2 other, I guess the Isaac Reed character is important because he's kind of the Mel Gibson, the Sylvester Stallone, the Jason Bourne of this, he's the one that can kill 10 men at any moment when he feels like it.
And he does again and again and again. Yep.
Any thoughts on Timmy Riggins from Friday Night Lights?
I thought the actor was great. I thought,
great.
he did a great job. He was entertaining.
Yeah, I do too. I just wish it would have ended different.
Yeah.
So I won't give that away.
Okay.
But I wish it was a different ending.
Okay.
I will just say, if we're going to talk about historically what was possible, no one crossed the Wasatch Mountains in the winter. No one.
Oh, really?
Oh, no. Not Native Americans, not the U.S. Army. That's why they couldn't make it into Salt Lake Valley, because the snows came in and they were done, let alone these ill-equipped women, children, and a guide on horses. That's the other thing, is you didn't cross the Wasatch Mountain Range on horses. You crossed on mules or oxen in the summer. But yeah, going through there in the winter, no one did that. That was absolutely impossible. So.
Did you notice Sarah wearing pants? Would a woman ever would a woman ever wear pants in the frontier in 1857?
Sure. I mean, some women would have, but yeah, that was funny. My husband and I were watching. He's like, "Why is she wearing pants all of a sudden? Where'd she get those pants?
Those Lululemon? Like, what were they?"
I don't know. I mean, sure, there are accounts of some women who were actually gender non-binary, who would sometimes dress as men. I've read historical accounts like that. But yeah, it was just kind of confusing. Why all of a sudden she's wearing pants? She should have been wearing pants at the start when she's riding the horses the whole way.
Yeah.
But that was a little confusing.
Okay, a couple other characters we'll just talk about as we're kind of wrapping up. There's the character Jacob Pratt, who's a Mormon, he's traveling with his wife Abish Pratt, and I thought the Mormon themes between these two couples, these two and the couple were interesting. The topic of polygamy was introduced with this couple because I think, I don't know, some of the rougher men were joking with Jacob Pratt about how many wives did he have, and then it seemed like Abish was almost like kidnapped as a wife. Like it seemed like she was never really into Mormonism, was never really
questioning.
She was questioning, kind of, and anything you want to say about Jacob and Abish? Again, not historical characters.
So what? Yeah, they're not historical. But the part about the men making fun of the Mormons because of polygamy, that was absolutely accurate, and that came out again and again in the sources. They would call Mormon women whores, which I thought was interesting because I was like, wouldn't it be the opposite of being a whore if you multiple women with one man? But anyways, they would really make fun of polygamy and the Mormon people for that. So that was accurate. And then one thing that was not accurate was when they're on the wagon and Abish says, I'm not really sure why I'm going to Utah. And he says, well, it's about family. It's because we're for our family. That the Mormon emphasis on the family is a very 20th century construct. That was not the reasons why they were emigrating, moving to Zion, if you will, in Utah in the 19th century. So that was like a weird 20th century interpretation placed on these 19th century people. People who were going to Utah, they knew exactly why they were going. They were going to build Zion, build up the kingdom of God in Utah in preparation for the second coming of Jesus Christ. They were preparing for the millennium. They were millennialists. They knew exactly why they were going. There was no question about that.
Okay. Darren?
That marriage, didn't they wasn't she probably not his first choice as a wife?
Yeah, his sister.
Didn't she have an older sister died?
Yeah, her sister died.
And it's almost like, well, you're elected. You're the next person up.
Yeah.
And so she didn't want to be there. I don't think she bought off on that marriage at all. And it was never supposed to be her. So that relationship always had a tense element to it because of that. I felt like she was forced into it, and that's how it played out for me for the rest of the thing. So,
okay.
I felt like Jacob Pratt was another trope. Just this wild-eyed, delusional kind of. He was crazy.
Injury.
Yeah. But he's a little weird before.
He was weird.
But anyways, just like those crazy, delusional Mormons. I felt like he, personified that trope, that kind of cardboard character.
Yeah. And again, we mentioned this earlier, but for those joining us late, like here's a photo of him surviving the Mountain Meadows Massacre, having been scalped. There were no scalpings at the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and no adults survived. So again, we just want to reiterate that. Okay, one final character that I want to mention, and I promise, Darren, we'll get you out of here at 2.
We got a few minutes.
It was the character Wild Bill Hickman. Let me just read what they've got here. Devoted to Brigham Young. This is the character, not necessarily the historical figure. I'm dying to know if he's real. Devoted to Brigham Young and the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Wild Bill Hickman is a member of the Nauvoo Legion, the Mormon organized militia. Hickman was active during the Utah War. Sounds like it is based on a real person, and the numerous attempts to keep the U.S. Army at bay. Alex Bro's previous appearances, that's the actor who plays Wild Bill Hickman, included Waco, The Aftermath, Joe Pickett, and Depraved. So tell us, Barbara and Darren, what you know about Wild Bill Hickman, or if he exists or not.
Oh, go ahead.
So Wild Bill Hickman was a real character.
So he's real.
He's real.
Okay.
But the way the roles and that they put him in, things they had him doing were not real.
Okay.
But he was a real character, and he's legendary. He's one of these legendary figures in the American West and in Mormon history. So, and he was called Wild Bill Hickman for a reason. So, as I was mentioning, like if you were a man age 18 or over in Utah during this time, you were considered in the militia. So yes, he was a member of the Mormon militia. He murders a man who owned a different fort. He owned Fort Seminole, a different trading post on the trail, and took his money. And in fact, my ancestor's name was Daniel W. Jones, wrote about running into Hickman just after he had murdered this. I think his name was Seminole. Anyways, so he was a wild guy. And ultimately, he's excommunicated from the LDS Church. And
For what, do you know?
I think murder.
Oh.
Anyway, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm pretty sure it was for that murder. But anyways, later, this is incidentally, he joins a posse of people that is helping to hunt down John Dehlin, and he helps in the arrest of John Dehlin, who was one of the leading perpetrators of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So he's a very colorful character. And again, you got to love that name, Wild Bill Hickman. But he was not the head of the Nauvoo Legion. He was not kind of dignified. Like, he was a hard scrabble man. So the things that he was doing in this series were not based on fact.
Anything, Darren, you want to say about Wild Bill Hickman's portrayal?
No, I mean, the coach speak in me says, you know, you look at Hickman and you look like at guys like Porter Rockwell.
Yeah, I wish they had brought in Porter Rockwell instead. Yeah.
That was the big miss for that whole thing. But
yeah,
you look at characters like that and you think they certainly played a role in those early days and what happened. And you don't really like their characters, but everybody wants a couple of those guys on your team. And so to do the dirty work and to do the things that most of you aren't willing to do.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's how I look at those guys.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree. I think Porter Rockwell would have been the better person that was actually on Brigham Young's team, and a very colorful character. Wild Bill was not on Brigham Young's team. In fact, he says after he's accused and he's indicted for the murder of Seminole, he says, oh, well, Brigham Young told me to do it. And he blames it on Brigham Young. So no, they were not, he was not on Brigham Young's team.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, there's this scene where, if I'm remembering right, Wild Bill Hickman's harassing Bridger, and Bridger just takes a shovel and cuts his toes off.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things to watch. That didn't happen.
Yeah, well, it didn't happen. Why are you laughing, Darren?
No. Yeah, I thought that was, it was stunning.
Like, I don't think shovels can like cut off entire boots and toes all with one swipe. I mean, maybe they could, but
maybe I've never tried it.
But then Bridger, and in later scenes, Bridger and Hickman are like talking as if that never, they're like negotiating and talking as
I
if
don't
that
know
never
that
happened.
Bridger ever met Hickman. I'm not sure.
That's funny. Okay. Well, Barbara, I'm going to do something weird. This is going to be the final question I'm asked for both of you. I'm going to quote you, Barbara, in front of you, if that's okay. I promise. Okay. I'm pretty sure you're going to be okay with this. So I'm watching the show with Margie, and Barbara and I are texting because I'm like fact checking this. And Barbara, I think this is a really good way to end. And I'm going to ask this question to both of you. But when I was just kind of fact checking some of this with you, you wrote this to me, Barbara. Is it okay if I share it? You don't know what I'm going to share, but it's
I thought it was off the record, but sure, go ahead.
No, well,
I'm just teasing. Go ahead.
It's the missed opportunity.
Yes. Do
you want me to quote you? Is that okay? Okay.
Absolutely.
So you write, what does make me sad now that I finished the whole thing is that they spent millions of dollars on this almost completely made up story when the real story is so much more compelling, nuanced, tragic, fascinating, and illuminating about human nature and who we are as a Western society today. And, you know, we've already said
that was a pretty profound
it was awesome. It was a great text. But, you know, and of course you already started by saying you're glad they made this this series. Mm-hmm. You're glad historical fiction exists. But I want to give each of you a chance to just say, do you agree, Darren, with Barbara? We'll have you go first.
No, absolutely.
Tell me how you agree with that.
I agree with her because
in terms of Shoshone and Native American,
it starts the conversation.
Yeah.
My grandmother always would tell me, she said, Darren, no one has ever wanted to hear our story before. One day you will have to make them listen. And it's things like this and other things that start the conversation. It's not that accurate, but man, I've had 30 phone calls in the past week or two asking me about aspects of Shoshone culture and history. And so it gets the conversation started, it gets the dialogue going. And I think when you can sit down, not like-minded people, sit down and have a conversation about something and listen to people, I think that's when you can affect change. And for a group of people that have never had their story told, never had a seat at the table, this gives us an opportunity to finally talk and to finally share. Not that our opinion is better or more accurate. I think all perspectives need to be heard, and then let's, let people decide. So
as a Shoshone, you're glad this series was made.
yeah, I actually, for the most part of it, they depicted the Shoshones in a way that they probably would have lived. And I'm grateful for that, they're a prominent part of the story.
Yeah.
And so it fosters dialogue though.
So other than the book, Bear River Massacre, Shoshone History, if you were to give our viewers and listeners one or two movies or documentaries or books where they could learn more about either Native Americans generally or Shoshone specifically, do you have just a recommendation or two?
Not off the top of my head. I don't.
Fine.
Not that there's not a lot of work been done around that. Maybe you can help me out, Barbara, but I'm not aware of anything right this second
That's
that
fine.
really highlights that.
I would recommend the work of Ned Blackhawk, who is
he's
Eastern
good.
Shoshone. He is a professor of American Indian Studies at Yale University. Brilliant. And he has done a lot of work on just this whole, the conquering of the West, the conquest of the West, and Native American peoples being.
There was a movie that came out a few years ago called Wind River.
Yeah.
Jeremy Renner stars in that. And I thought it was well done, but it highlights missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yeah.
And it tells that story in a really accurate, hard, powerful way. So
love it.
So you can just Google Ned Blackhawk, and he's written some, major national prize winning books. So he's fantastic. I've heard him speak, and the first time I met him, he said to me, and this ties into what Darren was just saying, he says, everybody always wants to know about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, the massacre of white people. Why isn't anyone talking about the Bear River Massacre or most of the people massacred in American history were Native Americans. So we need to talk about those massacres far more. And so I'm so glad that I join with Darren and saying I'm so glad that even though, yes, this is fictionalized, it is raising people's awareness. It's creating these conversations like we're having today. I'm thrilled to hear Darren's been getting tons of phone calls as well. So that's a good thing.
You have been too?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And when I reached out to you originally, John, it was really important to me that a Native voice was represented here. And so I reached out to Darren and again, I love what his grandmother May said to him, someday you will tell the story when people are ready to listen. So I love that people are listening and asking these questions now. I think that's fantastic. And so, if people want to learn more about the true story in terms of the historical accuracy of all of these events, I brought basketfuls of basketful of books that people can dig in and read more about this. And that's wonderful. And honestly, the true story is so much more compelling. The true characters are so much more nuanced. They're not just like the black-hatted bad guys and the white-hatted good guys. It's just the very, very complex story of various groups of people. And they're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
So, and I hope we can get away from the trope of, the genteel East had to go out, the Easterners, white people from the East had to go out and civilize the wild, violent West, because the entire nation's history is rooted in violence.
Mm. So Barbara, are you let's just say there's some enterprising producer or director out there that wants to do, has a good Mountain Meadows Massacre documentary dramatic depiction ever been made? Has it ever been made?
So
have you ever seen one?
No.
There's bad ones, right?
It's always, so it's the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and this context is always fictionalized. And my co-author Rick and I were saying we're so confused by that because the real story is so much better, and it's written. It's all there. It's got the drama. It's got the historical characters. So Mark Twain comes through. Sam Houston is involved. All of these great characters are already there, and the true story is so much better. And so actually, Peter Berg actually called my co-author Rick Turley. I was out of town, but Rick met him at the Mountain Meadows and gave him a tour of the Mountain Meadows. And we were starting to, send him our books and everything. And then he responded, well, we just decided to do a fictional series, which, that's his prerogative, of course, but we were really disappointed. We're like, because we were thinking finally there's going to be, a factually based depiction of it. So it was disappointing that it wasn't that way. But again, I'm sure they had their reasons. And again, I'm just glad that he did it at all. But yeah, if anyone ever wants to do the actual history, it's such a good story. And until then, folks, if you want to read about it, read Darren's book, read my book, read countless other historians' book who have written about this period.
So Barbara, how do people get a hold of you if they want to have you to consult them on a depiction of the Mountain Meadows Massacre? How do people get a hold of you?
Well, if they don't know me already, I guess I'm on Facebook. Just send me
Barbara
Jones Brown, message me on Facebook.
And you're also the head of Signature Books, right?
Yeah, I run a publishing company that publishes Utah, Mormon, and Western American history. And then Darren,
if people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
I'm on all social media platforms just under my name, Darren Parry.
It's Darren.
Parry.
Parry.
Yeah.
And again, finally, just to plug, Darren's amazing book is The Bear River Massacre, Shoshone History. Again, Darren with an EN and Parry with the PA. He's also teaching at Utah State University if you're happening to take classes there. And Barbara Jones Brown's book, along with Richard Turley, is Vengeance is Mine, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and its aftermath. Thank you both. Barbara, thanks for making this happen. Thanks for being a regular guest.
No, you
on
made
the
it
show.
happen. Thank you for liking this idea.
And Darren, thanks for coming all the way down from
my
Cache
pleasure.
Valley. And it's so delightful to get to know you. I'd love to maybe bring you back and have you tell us the story of the Bear River Massacre.
I'd love to.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thanks to you both. I'm going to end quick because Darren's got to go. Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories. Thanks to Julia, Maven, Gerardo, Brooklyn, and everyone who makes all this possible. Thanks to our regular donors that make Mormon Stories possible. Go to mormonstories.org to become a monthly donor. Thanks for all our viewers and listeners. Please subscribe on YouTube and all the other channels that makes it possible. Please be good to each other. Please be kind to each other. Thanks to the creators of American Primeval for making this discussion possible. And you all be good to each other. Be kind to each other. We'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.